Okay, so we had to finish the slides of the last lecture, you remember, but now for some reason it doesn't allow me to open the file. I have no idea why. So I would say, I suggest let's go on with today's lecture, and then at the end I will see if I manage to open it. Otherwise, we can do it next time. So one important point, so the follow-up of this course. So unfortunately, next week, next Friday, there will be no lecture. Just I have another commitment I cannot miss. So I will also write a message to everybody, but just keep in mind that no lecture next week. Then for sure we have a lecture on the 8th of July, and then we may have another one on the 15th. And we can decide whether to have it or not. So I think the exam is on around the 20th, 20 something, no? Yeah. So it could be, so we could keep it as maybe as a Q&A, maybe. So basically, what is missing in the course is this today's lecture, so the international dimension. Then I wanted to go back a bit to the blockchain. There were a couple of topics that were a bit that I left a bit hanging on the blockchain, also the environmental impact and so on. So I want to come back to that, and then I have a few slides on the future of money and so wrapping everything together. So a little bit going back to the beginning of the course. So I think everything can be done more or less in one lecture. So in principle we could finish on the 8th, and we could keep it the 15th for possible question and answer, or talking about the exam, how the exam is structured, that type of thing. So would that be okay for you, or? Yeah? So basically for sure, so no lecture next week, for sure on the 8th in person, and on the 15th maybe we can decide together, and most likely the last would be in Zoom. Okay? Sounds good? Okay, so we do today's lecture, and then at the end I'll see if I have time to go to the previous one, finish the previous one, and if I manage to open the file. Otherwise we do it next time. Okay, international dimension of digital currency. So by the way, any question on last week's lecture on CBDC? Yeah. So the international dimension. So first, I mean, we partly already touched upon these topics, but it's useful to come back. So let's discuss a little bit international cooperation in general. So why do we want international cooperation, meaning different sovereign states to cooperate among each other? So the rationales are the usual ones for those we have already seen for regulation in a sense, but applied at the international level. So you can have externalities, and this time externalities is meant cross-border, so between one country and another. Okay, so what I do in my country has an effect on another country. So this is the cross-country externalities. And the related concept is that of global public goods. So it's I produce some global public good in a sense is a good which has positive externalities. So what I do here has positive externalities on other countries. No? And these are the so-called global public goods. So public goods at the world level, at the international level. Okay, and so the idea is that the provision of global public goods can be done only by cooperation between different sovereign states. Okay, not be done by one single state. There is a huge literature on global public goods, and typically this literature distinguishes different types of global public goods. So you can have a global public good may be determined by the sum of the efforts of all countries. So an example of that is climate change. So the emissions, the CO2 emissions of each country contribute to the global emissions. And so what matters is the sum of what each country does. Okay, so you have to agree. So now if you want to cut emissions at the world level, you have to convince countries to cut their own emissions so as to contribute to the global emissions reduction. Okay, that's a typical, and that's a very common type of global public good, but it's not the only type. You can have also the best effort type of good. So if one country has to send a man on the moon, this can be done by cooperation of states, but it can also be done by the most powerful advanced state. Or suppose that there is a meteorite coming to the Earth, to hit the Earth, and you have to hit this meteorite with nuclear rockets. Probably the best thing is the strongest country, I don't know, the United States, would do that. Okay, so you don't need necessarily an international cooperation. So the stopping of this destruction of the Earth can be done by the best effort of each country. Okay, or you could have a competition of creating a vaccine. Competition between countries in the end is only the best effort, or maybe a couple of best efforts that then produce the vaccine. Okay. So in the case of the COVID vaccine, 3 or 4 countries eventually managed to produce a vaccine. There was a US, UK, which probably was the most successful. Russia did a vaccine, and also China. So only a few of them did that. No, so but not. So the efforts of many countries in the vaccine were irrelevant because only a few of them were close to the frontier of knowledge to be able to produce a vaccine. So you get the message. And then the third possible type is the weakest link. So the outcome is determined by the country with the weakest situation. So this is a typical situation for epidemics and pandemics. So if you want to destroy a virus, and if the virus still circulates in a certain country, this can also affect many other countries. Okay, so what you need to. So if you want to eradicate an illness, you have to be sure that each and every country eliminates that illness, that virus, that bacteria. So you have to. In this case, the cooperation is convincing the weakest or the least willing to help countries to do something. And in a sense, if you think about regulation of offshore digital currencies, crypto, and so on, is more, in thinking in terms of regulation, probably this third type is the most relevant, because in the end, activity can always migrate to a country with the least regulation. So in a sense, if we're doing different types of public goods, maybe the third type is the one that really matters for at least for regulation of crypto activities. So cooperation is costly. It is challenging the presence of sovereign states. As we discussed, states are sovereign, meaning that they cannot be forced to do anything. And so so what is a theory of international cooperation? So the typical theory of international cooperation says is always a trade-off between managing these externalities and heterogeneity of preferences. So whether one-size-fits-all solutions is optimal or not. Take the example of privacy. So suppose that we say, okay, data need to be protected, okay, and so there is an element of international cooperation in the sense that if I protect my data too much in my country, then the activity will migrate in another country where the regulation is not so stringent. Okay, so there is a regulatory arbitrage. So activities will go abroad, and that's the international dimension, the externality dimension. So so if you want to cooperate, you should agree on a minimum degree of privacy everywhere in the world. But at the same time, countries may differ, or populations may differ in how much they care about privacy. So if we say, okay, privacy must be above a certain minimum, there may be countries where the optimal level of privacy is below that minimum. So whenever you have questions of international cooperation, it's always a bit this trade-off. You want to manage these externalities and provide these global public goods, but at the same time, you don't want to impose as the same solution or a similar solution on many different countries which have different preferences. So it's always a conflict between the fact that what we do have effect on others, but at the same time that an international agreement implies that some people will not be happy, will not, so the solution will not be fully in line with their preferences. I want to do things as I want, and therefore that's why international cooperation is costly. Is that clear? Can you make other examples of the global public goods? So can somebody make an example, for example, the sum of efforts? What could be another example of sum of efforts type of global public good? Yeah, I guess everything related to pollution, emissions is a typical example, I would say. No? Another example of weakest link. What could be another example of weakest link? So that basically the worst countries, yeah.
Maybe like fighting terrorism.
Fighting?
Terrorism.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly. So exactly, if Al Qaeda can go to Afghanistan, then the problem is there. So you need to regulate Afghanistan. Yeah. 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 The offshore centers. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's sufficient that you have Cayman Islands or offshore center, then the whole tax system may collapse. Exactly. Yeah. 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 Best effort. Exactly. So best effort are typically. Situations of being a technological frontier, or yeah. So the US went to the moon, and only the US could do it at a time. So yeah. Okay, so what are relevant aspects of that? So that we discuss in general, but where international cooperation important in the area of digital currency? By digital currency, I mean crypto, I mean stable coins, CBDC, and so forth. So certainly there is a need for global cooperation in regulation. So digital assets by definition are mobile, so they can travel across borders easily. Obviously, the internet has no borders. So if you want to prevent regulatory arbitrage, remember, is the idea that if you regulate tight in this jurisdiction, the activity will go to another jurisdiction where regulation is lax. Okay. So if you want to prevent that, you need to have some kind of agreement internationally. And so one concern now is that these digital assets may be used to circumvent capital controls and sanctions. So you know what capital controls are? Can you make an example of capital control? What is a capital control? Capital flow. So capital flows are movement of investment across countries. So I am a U.S. citizen. I invest in, in China. Okay. So my investment will cross the border. So from the United States, I will, as a U.S. citizen, I will invest in China. Okay, that's capital flows, and many countries try to limit how much this can happen, both in inflow and outflow. So it's either foreigners investing in my country or my citizens investing abroad. And there is a system of now it's much less than before, but there are still capital controls. So sometimes, China is an example. So in China, it's not a fully open capital account. So it's not easy to either invest in China or even more for Chinese residents to invest abroad. So of course these capital controls may be circumvented. So there are ways to circumvent it. There is also this a huge issue, but the concern is that digital currencies, digital assets, make it easier to circumvent capital controls, precisely because it's so easy to make basically money travel, across borders. It will be easy to circumvent capital controls. And the other element, of course, is sanctions. So if sanctions are imposed on a country or a group of countries, these countries may escape the sanctions using digital assets, precisely because it's not normally these the control. So these capital controls are imposed by some border authority. So somebody will check, somebody will prevent. So if there is an institution involved, then these capital controls or sanctions are applied. So if I want to say save in country X, but all the banks in country X don't allow me to have a deposit in that country in order to apply these government capital controls or sanctions, then it will not be possible for me to invest in that country. The financial institutions there will not allow me to do that. But of course, on a blockchain, in a decentralized system, that becomes very easy. So if you want to avoid that, we need more international cooperation. Then there is a question of international monetary system. I'll maybe why don't I close a bit the sun. So there is a okay. Okay. I assume too much manual. Is this one? This one. Okay. Okay, I guess it's okay. So in my office, this thing is automatic. So sometimes it's quite weird that you are in the middle of a meeting and then it becomes very dark. So this thing comes down and you find yourself from complete light in complete dark, because it's one of these intelligent buildings that basically takes care of. So if it is too hot, then it will close all the windows. But sometimes it closes really in a dark way, so you find yourself completely in the dark. So it's quite amazing. Anyway, so okay, international monetary system, I have a slide, so we can go on that. Cross-border payments, I also have a slide. Environmental impact is another element of international cooperation. So if that's another autonomous action. Okay. Environmental impact. So if I am a miner of Bitcoin and I use a lot of energy to mine Bitcoins, this of course will create emissions, and the emissions travel in the atmosphere. So this will create externalities. Okay. So if I am a country, I allow Bitcoin mining, this may have a negative environmental impact. But of course, I don't harm myself. I harm also others. So to prevent that, you need international cooperation. So you need to, limit these activities worldwide. Otherwise, it's sufficient that a few countries allow them, that all the activities will migrate there, and then there will be the same amount of emissions. Okay, international monetary system. Okay, so here it's also an interesting discussion. So here I just give you a bit of basics of that. So what is the international monetary system is essentially which currency is used in international transactions. And this is both in trade and finance. Okay, so these currencies are used whenever any activity, so financial or real activity, so import and export, crosses a border. Or if when central banks hold foreign exchange reserves, so reserves in foreign currency, okay? So we know, again, big picture, we know that this international role of currencies is driven by a few factors. So size is one factor. So the issuer of that currency must be big economy, must be open. So if you're not open to trade, it's hard to believe that that your currency may be international. The quality of institutions. So if your country protects property rights, then your currency is easier that this currency becomes an international currency, is used in international trade. And perhaps most important of all, the depth of financial markets. So if you have a large, liquid financial market, that helps the international role of currencies. Okay, so who is the international currency? Now is the US dollar. Partly because the US has all these characteristics. It's certainly is the world's biggest economy. Is quite open. It has, despite what we may seem from recent politics in the U.S. as a pretty high quality of institutions, and the financial market, the U.S. financial market is the biggest in the world and the most liquid in the world. So for all these reasons, since World War II, the U.S. dollar has been the dominant currency, meaning that most international trade and finance are carried out in U.S. dollars. They also define the U.S. dollar. For example, the oil price is defined in U.S. dollars. Okay, and many other prices of international traded commodities, also food and so on. Okay, so partly this may be a national monopoly. So some people say there can only be one currency. There can only be one and cannot be two or three. So it's a national monopoly. But not everybody agrees with that. Some people say no, there could be a duopoly or more. So many people say the U.S. I mean, the U.S. has all these assets, but the weight of the U.S. in the world is not the same as it was in 1945. So at the end of World War II, the U.S. was really the dominant economy. I think it was about half of the world economy at the time, partly because Europe was destroyed and emerging countries were not important still. But the situation now has changed because the U.S. Now the U.S. is still, of course, a very big economy, but now is less than, I think it's about a quarter of the world economy, so not half of the quarter. And that's partly because Europe has risen again, and partly because the emerging economies such as India and China have had very fast growth, a very spectacular growth. So at the end, now the U.S., despite, basically the U.S. is around 25% of the world economy, but the dollar is about 70-80% of international trade and finance. Okay, so the dollar dominates around 75%, but the weight of the U.S. economy is around 25%. So some people say the U.S. punches above its weight. So the U.S. is less and less important internationally in terms of economic size, but the dollar remains unchallenged. So what is the effect of having an international currency like the dollar? So the U.S. can borrow cheaply because everybody wants to hold dollars. So this means the U.S. can borrow at very low rates. So this is called, this is what the French call the exorbitant privilege. So the ability of the U.S. to, by basically borrowing at low interest rates, to basically gain value over time. So they invest a higher. So on the asset side, they invest at higher interest rates, but when they borrow at low rates. Okay, so this is the exorbitant privilege. But more recently, other people have said that, but together with the exorbitant privilege, there is an exorbitant duty, the fact that the US dollar appreciates in crisis. So whenever there is a financial crisis or uncertainty, a financial market collapse, the US dollar appreciates. It's considered to be a safe currency, safe haven. Okay, is one characteristic of an international currency also. So what happens is basically the US is appreciating, meaning that their exports are less competitive, precisely when there is a crisis. Okay, so which means that the other currency depreciate against the US dollars, which helps them in a crisis. Okay, so this is what is called the exorbitant duty. So now the question so this is just a short description of the international monetary system. So I mean, part of the international monetary system is also about how you run your balance of payments, what you do if you are short of dollars, and your bilateral exchange rate with US dollar is a very important variable for your international trade and balance of payments. Okay, so because there is this dominant currency paradigm. Okay, so what matters for countries is a bilateral exchange rate between your country and the US dollar. Okay, so if the US dollar appreciates, this means that more and more countries will have difficulty with the balance of payments. Okay, so now all this discussion, the question is now with these digital currencies, in particular, the likely introduction of CBDC, could it change this balance of powers? So some people say, okay, because I mean, as I said, the US is a bit later in issuing CBDC. China is ahead. Maybe the euro area is also doing that. So will the introduction of CBDC change that? And so my view and the view maybe of majority will be probably not. So it's not clear that a CBDC would change the same, because the reason is that all these factors that I mentioned, so size, openness, quality institutions, depth of financial market, they are not really affected by CBDCs. The CBDC is just an easy way to create a currency that is easier to trade internationally, so easier than physical cash, of course. So in that sense, the CBDC say, okay, could increase the international appeal of a currency, but it's not fundamentally different from other safe assets such as bonds, money market funds, and so on. So even though it's true that CBDC can travel internationally more, is not so my conclusion would be, but to be seen, of course, is that it will not change. So if the euro area and China introduce a CBDC that it can be used internationally, these should not change fundamentally the relative role of currencies and the role of the dollar as the dominant currency. That's what most people say, but of course to be seen. No? Or maybe stable coins could. So if stable coins are, I mean, if, for example, the initial Libra project, remember the initial Libra project was multi-currency. So if that was introduced, it was successful, of course that could have changed that, because basically this means that the money used for transactions, both domestic but also internationally, would be essentially a multi-currency system. So the US dollar, the euro, the yen, the British pound, and so on. And these, of course, would diminish the role of the dollar. Because now if I trade with somebody, I don't know, in India, I tend to trade in dollars. But in the future, if Libra became dominant, I would trade in a combination of currencies. So this could have changed the balance in the international monetary system. But of course, this assumes that we have a multi-currency stablecoin that is also globally spread, and this is a tall order. So it's not easy to envisage that. Also because regulators may be stopping it, which they actually did. So any questions? I don't know if you have done any other courses, this international currencies discussion. Okay, digital dollarization. So now I'm speaking more about, suppose that there is a large country and then a smaller country. So what happens if the bigger country introduces CBDC? Okay, so think of this bigger country being, I don't know, the euro area, and the smaller country being the smaller countries in Eastern Europe, say the Balkans or countries like that. Okay, so is well, in this case it's well possible that digital currencies, CBDC but also other types, increase the risk of foreign use. So it's easier for citizens in other countries, again here thinking mainly about smaller countries, use the currency of the bigger economy. So the foreign use of currencies, so inside their countries, now I'm not speaking about cross-border use, I'm speaking about domestic use, okay, use in the country. The foreign use of currency is called dollarization. Okay, so the dollarization, be careful, doesn't mean necessarily use of the dollar. Dollarization is referred also to the euro and other currencies. So dollarization is a general term to say foreign use of currencies. Okay, so foreign currency loans, for example. So this is a very widespread phenomenon in many countries. Is loans in foreign currency. So why that? Because often the foreign currency have a low interest rate. So many countries have, for example, they have mortgages in Japanese yen or Swiss franc. So why? Because these currencies have a very low interest rate. So you pay a low interest rate on these mortgages. But of course, this is a risk because you are exposed, or the bank is exposed to the exchange rate risk. Okay, so the foreign currency loans is an example of dollarization. So foreign use of countries or use of foreign currencies in your domestic economy. So what would happen is if then a CBDC is introduced and can be used in these countries, they may increase the dollarization. So this is what people call the digital dollarization. So that because it's motivated by digital currencies, and so the recipient countries, so small open economies, emerging economies, could further lose monetary autonomy. So this means that their central bank loses control on prices because the prices are denominated in foreign currency. So there is more dollarization. Okay, so this is a concern. So in the G7 has issued a report saying that when introduce a CBDC, you have to think in terms of do no harm, meaning that you should not hurt your neighbors when introducing CBDC. So this could imply, for example, limiting foreign use. So you introduce CBDC, but then you make sure that there is no excessive use of CBDC or your CBDC in neighboring countries or in other smaller countries around. That's a bit the idea. So do no harm is the do no harm is the Hippocrates dictum. That is used in medicine, that the doctor should not harm the patients. And in this case, the idea that you should not harm your neighbor, which is also, if you want, a form of international cooperation. So if you don't harm your neighbor, it means that you have the interest of your neighbor at heart, and this is a form of international cooperation in a sense. So any questions on this? Digital dollarization is clear? Okay, super. Okay, now, so far we have talked about a big country introducing CBDC and what happens in the smaller economies around it. Now, there's other elements. Suppose that there are like two countries. Think of countries which are like similar size. So say the US and the Euro area introduce a CBDC. Or there is a global crypto that is used in both the US and the Euro area, okay, or China. So what happens? So here I don't know how much you know in international macro, but so I'm assuming you know. So I put it as a reminder that monetary policies in different countries are connected internationally through the exchange rate. So this is expressed by the uncovered interest parity. So what is the uncovered interest parity? Have you done it? I suppose you have done it. No? Uncovered interest parity, no? Okay, so the uncovered interest parity is the idea that if I suppose that I'm in the euro area and I want to invest in the US dollar, assets, okay? So if the interest rate in the US is higher, suppose the interest rate in the US is 5% and it is 0 in the euro area, okay? This means that in expectation, I have to expect that the dollar will depreciate by 5% to make things equal between investing in the euro area and investing in the US. Okay, so there is an arbitrage condition saying that I should be indifferent in investing in different countries, ex ante, in expectation. Okay, so if I invest in a country that has a higher interest rate, I should expect that currency to depreciate. Okay, unless there are capital controls. So this relationship between exchange rates and interest rates can be broken if in the presence of capital controls. Okay, because if there are capital controls, I'm not free to invest in other country. So this arbitrage is not possible. That's why, for example, this arbitrage is violated in China because China has capital controls. Okay, but this uncovered interest parity tends to hold in countries that have free floating capital flows, free capital flows. Okay, so where there is no capital control. So again, uncovered interest rate parity tells you that investing in a higher interest rate currency means that in expectation, the exchange rate of the currency should depreciate during that period. Okay? Yeah?
But to the same level as the euro area, or because
the same, yeah.
But isn't there like a risk premium as well?
No, exactly. That's true. So the uncovered interest parity, the purest form holds in expectation. But then, of course, there can be risk premia, and actually, this was my third bullet point. So empirically, the uncovered interest parity is highly disputed. So some people say it doesn't hold. I have a couple of papers myself on this topic, and so it's not clear that it holds. But in theory, ex ante, in a completely free arbitrage and rational investors, it should hold. So what is the Mendelian trilemma? So this is a trilemma coming from Mendel. Basically says that if you have no capital control, you can either control the interest rate or the exchange rate. So if you have, if you want to keep a stable exchange rate, okay, so suppose that you are, I don't know, Argentina, and you want to keep a stable exchange rate vis-a-vis the dollar. So you want to have a peg on the dollar. This means that the interest rate must be the same as the anchor country. So the interest rate must be the same that you have in the countries to which you fix your exchange rate. So if the exchange rate between Argentinian peso and dollar is fixed, then the interest rate should be the same, unless again you have capital controls. So basically the trilemma means that you can choose only two out of these three elements. The three elements is like control of interest rates, control of exchange rate, and free capital flows. Okay, so you can choose only two of these three elements. Again, interest rate, exchange rate, free capital flows. Okay. So for example, country like China may control both the interest rate and the exchange rate, but the cost of not having free capital flows. Or you can decide to have free capital flows and stabilize the exchange rate, but then you lose control of your interest rate. If you want to stabilize the interest rate, then and you want to have free capital flows, then you have to let the exchange rate float. Probably the euro area vis-a-vis the US is in this last situation. So the euro area has free capital flows with the US, has control of interest rates. The result of this is that the euro-dollar exchange rate fluctuates. So there is no control of the euro-dollar exchange rate. Okay, that's the Mandel trilemma. Okay, again, this is empirically disputed. It's not clear how and when it holds, how strong it is, but that's the basic theory of basically the international dimension of monetary policy, if you want. So the exchange rate is always a result of monetary policies. It's always driven by monetary policies, essentially. Okay, the relative monetary policy. So monetary policy of one country vis-a-vis another. Yeah. I mean, there are, of course, extreme forms of stable exchange rates. So if you have a currency board, so for example, Bulgaria with the euro area, so Bulgaria has had a currency board, so a very fixed exchange rate vis-a-vis the euro. Of course, the interest rate in Bulgaria is completely driven by the euro. Denmark, the same. So Denmark has a fixed exchange rate with the euro. So whenever the ECB changes interest rate, the Danish Central Bank does the same even on the same day. Okay, so if in the morning the ECB decides to increase the interest rates, the Danish Central Bank in the afternoon decides to increase interest rates. Okay, so it's because Denmark is exactly in this situation of the trilemma. So he has free capital flows and wants to basically stabilize the exchange rate between the krona and the euro. So that's why the interest rate has to follow, loses control of the interest rate. So this interest rate has to follow the ECB. Okay, so this was a crash course on international macro, but that is more or less the kind of fundamental. So now let's go to our digital currencies. So CBDC and stable coins, they are highly liquid and tradable. So some authors believe that they will basically make this UIP more powerful. So again, the UIP is a theoretical relationship. It should hold. There are strong reasons to believe that it holds if investors are rational and so on. But empirically, it's not so clear. Okay, so it's there are maybe risk premium, other stuff in there. But again, so the fact that you have the existence of this UIP is predicated on the existence of bonds, basically bonds that can be traded internationally. So this means that you are an investor, I can invest in a US bond, and that possibility creates this uncovered interest parity. So I must be able to invest in the US bond. Okay. So now comes CBDC on stable coins. They are very liquid and tradable like bonds, but on top of that, they also offer payment services. So they are kind of bond even more attractive than bonds if you want, because they can also be used for payments and also can be transferred easily. Also, no? You can trade them on a blockchain or so they are easily tradable cross border. So some people say the UIP will become tighter. So we move closer to the UIP, to the theoretical ideal of the UIP. Okay, and there are some papers. So this paper, actually, I'm a co-author of one of this paper. So we show that this could hold for CBDC. So if a country introduces CBDC, then makes again. So this makes the UIP more powerful in the sense that you move closer to the ideal of the UIP. So the UIP becomes more stringent. And this other paper by Benigno and co-authors, they show this for the global crypto. So they say there is the way they define is like a global stable coin, so similar to the Libra idea. And so they show if there is a global crypto can be traded in both economies. These again will the effect of connecting the monetary policy into economies more. So there will be more UIP, more connection between the two monetary policies. Okay, so for both papers show that there is more international connection of interest rates and exchange rates in the presence of either CBDC or stable coins. I mean, you don't need to know the details of those papers. I mean, if you want to read them, you are very welcome to do that. But I think the idea is this, that you create more connection between monetary policies if you have a CBDC. I mean, the intuition again is that it's an asset that is easily tradable internationally and also carries some payment services. It's not only like a bond that you only for investment. You can also use them for payments, so as additional kind of advantages. Of course, if the CBDC can be used internationally, it's not a given. So if there are no limits to international use of CBDC, which may be. Any questions? I mean, it was a bit of a crash course, but I would have thought that you have done this already, but it's not. I don't know exactly what your studies have done. Okay, so a couple of other points. So digital currency and international payments. It was another element that I covered at the beginning. So the international payments. So right now, if you want to send a payment in another country, so you are in Germany, you want to send a payment to India, for example, is costly. It takes time. Okay, so there is this paper, Binsail Pantelopoulos. They have data on that, but I think this is known to anybody who has tried to send money abroad using things like Union Investment and so on. Okay, so partly there is a reason for that. The compliance concerns are higher for international payments. Okay, so there is a higher. I mean, in general, it is believed that there is a higher risk that an international payment can be illegal. So there are several reasons for that, but I mean, essentially, things like money laundering, they may be higher if you have an international payment. No, they may be more suspicious at least. No, especially in certain countries. Okay, so if there is a payment coming out of Afghanistan to Somalia, I don't know. You may be suspicious. Maybe it's terrorism. I don't know. So of course, one should not prejudge. But there is a feeling that international payments are more suspicious and more at risk of illicit activities such as money laundering and so forth. So partly this is a reason why they need more compliant checks. But partly is also partly is a result of inefficiency, because there are two jurisdictions involved. So there are two legal systems, two state authorities involved in checking this payment and or in allowing this payment, and that always takes a problem. So whenever you have two countries involved, this creates problems. So I think all of us have experience of that. So last year I had to ask a German hospital to send an analysis to an Italian hospital, and it was a nightmare. To first of all, which language to use. So at the end, I translated myself the doctor's report into Italian. So because it was not possible to. Then the hospital could not send an email; they only sent fax. So I had to prepare a fax and send a fax myself. So that's how it is frequently the case. So whenever you have two countries, interacting, different culture, different ways of operation, different languages, always more complicated. So this is one reason why international payments are difficult, and there is a reason. So there is a fundamental reason, but there is also inefficiency in the sense that correspondent banking is the way international payments are done through the banking system. This means basically that a bank in country A has some correspondent, so somebody who is connected to in country B, so that's correspondent banking. And this is a very oligopolistic setting. So there are few banks in each country doing that. So they extract rents, and these are very oligopolistic markets. An advantage of this system, however, is that banks tend to take compliance seriously. So banks are pretty good in checking compliance because they're used to it. Not all banks and not in all countries, but generally banks as intermediaries, they're used to compliance, they're used to regulation. So if I send a very suspicious payment, so if I want to buy weapons abroad and I send €1 million to buy some biological weapons, there is a high likelihood that the banks will stop it. So they do some good checks, so they take compliance. So that's an advantage of banks. So disadvantage, they are oligopolistic. Advantage, they take compliance seriously. But still, this situation is a problem. In particular, it's a problem for international remittances. So remittances is basically money that immigrants send to their families abroad. Okay, so I'm a citizen of a poorer country. I go to work in a richer country. What I do, I send part of my income abroad back home to my family. Okay, many people do that. Okay, so remittances is very important for some countries. Is 10-15% of GDP. So it's a big source of income for many countries. And of course, if it is very costly to send the money home, then part of this money will be lost in this international payment. So what's happening now? So this space is being occupied by fintech. So there are many fintech firms that are taking advantage of this through aggressive pricing. So many of these fintech basically allow international payments in short time and with a low cost. But this is also seen as bearing some risks. So there may be operational risks. Some of these firms are small. So the payment can get lost and so on, but also compliance. So there is a feeling that these fintech firms, they are keen to gain market share, and they take all payments, including the suspicious ones. So the checking on compliance may be less than for banks. Okay, so this is the international payment situation. Now, it's not clear if crypto and CBDC will change this. But there is a potential. So of course, again, so these digital currencies are by definition stateless. So they operate especially if they operate in a decentralized setting, where there is basically no financial institution involved. You throw away all this correspondent banking and all this stuff, because this is done basically in a peer-to-peer system. So basically, I send you in another country a payment directly in a decentralized system. I don't need to involve any bank, anybody. And so you see that there is a big potential to change that. CBDC also, if the CBDC is used again in a decentralized way, so bypassing all this correspondent banking system. So whether, it's not clear whether this will change this, but the potential is there. So yeah, so this is an area to be watched, whether basically these new forms of money will change or alleviate the problems with international payments. Any questions? Have you tried to do international payments, especially in a kind of... Okay, this is probably the last slide. Okay, so there is also international cooperation on CBDC specifically. So I mentioned already many countries now are thinking about introducing CBDC. So should they cooperate? So far they haven't cooperated much. So the focus has been domestic. So the countries that are more advanced in introducing CBDC, they do it mostly for domestic use and with a domestic focus. Exchanging information is useful. So especially with the pioneers, so those who are more advanced than you. So we often interact with the Swedish central bank, the Riksbank, because Sweden is more advanced in the introduction of CBDC that they call the e-krona. So exchanging info is useful. One question is it beneficial to be a first mover? So one question is, should you introduce a CBDC first or wait for the others? Wait if it works and then you think more carefully about it yourself. And one benefit of being a first mover could be that you set a standard. So what you establish in your own CBDC, then is also used abroad. Okay, so setting a standard initially you set things on a path that then is followed by others. Another possibility is this idea of islands of cooperation. So it could be that there is a kind of cooperation in areas, between groups of in groups of countries that are similar or close. So you can think of, I don't know, the G7 countries, having, what the G7 is, no? The G7 is the rich advanced economies. No? So the G7 countries doing something together, and maybe the BRIC doing something, so you can also have islands of cooperation. That's also true in general, by the way. So there could be stronger cooperation in groups of likely or more like-minded countries. So often the G7 do something together because they have similar interests, and more lately the BRIC, so the big emerging economies do something together, a bit less than that, but they try. So there could be islands also of cooperation. So then the question is, so should countries use a CBDC to push for a stronger international role? So for example, now if China and the Euro area introduce a CBDC, should they use that as a tool to challenge the role of the dollar? And so I think the feeling in most places is that it's not the right tool. So this is what I already mentioned. Other factors are more important, more fundamental factors are more important. So there is feeling that it will not be a game changer, but again, to be seen. So question mark on that. And then a question which also not looked at really in practice, but a little bit more in theory, is interoperability. So interoperability means that I can use two CBDCs together. So I can exchange, for example, two CBDCs. And so it's probably too early to think about that. So first we have to introduce CBDC, and then you think about interoperability with others. But there are already ideas. So the Bank for International Settlements has already championed a bit this idea of what they call the MCBDC. So what they want to do is to have a platform where you can exchange different CBDC. So their idea is that so in each jurisdiction you use your own CBDC, so monetary sovereignty is preserved. So if I'm in Euro area, I use a Euro CBDC. If I'm in the US, I use a US CBDC, and so on. But for international payments, there is a system of converting one CBDC into another. So in a sense, this could also lead to a more multipolar international monetary system because there will be no dominant currency. So each whenever you cross the border, you exchange one CBDC into another. You don't need to use the dollar or any other currency. You simply convert one into another. So that's the MCBDC idea. To use CBDC for cross-border payments. But again, this is for the moment is science fiction because we still have to introduce the CBDC. So let alone to think about international use. So this is ideas that are floating. But of course, I mean, some people say, a CBDC, we can introduce a CBDC only if it fundamentally improves payments. So why then not? I mean, it's a bit the discussion we had last week. So why then introduce a CBDC if it doesn't lead to a quantum leap for payments? And so we need that. So if we want to do that, then this international use is crucial because it could be one reason for introducing CBDC because the domestic payments are fine. The big problem is international payments. So if you don't improve international payments, so why then introducing CBDC? So even though it's not topical now, it's a bit in the back of the mind of people to say, so we want a fundamental improvement in cross-border payments as a reason for creating this new digital currency, this CBDC. Okay, so otherwise, why having it if it doesn't improve things, fundamentally? So domestically, it's also broad, or more broad than domestically. Any question? I mean, some of you come from international economics master? Yeah. Okay. So this probably most interesting for you because this question of international cooperation, come over and over in all. I mean, this in particular, the general things that I discuss here are really the core of all international questions, really. So this trade-off between externalities and difference in preferences is really pop-ups everywhere in all international questions, really. So it's a very frequent kind of way to look at things. Yeah. Did I have anything else? Yeah, these are the references. So if you want to read something, probably the second has more information on cross-border payments. It has some very interesting statistics. I mean, the second paper is written a bit from the point of view of central banks, so saying that fintech is not a good solution, that fintech is risky. Is a little bit the flavor of that paper, but that is too aggressive and so we need to have another solution. But that's a little bit. Yeah, and the G7 report is also interesting because it tells you a little bit more about this idea of doing no harm and the international use and make sure that it's beneficial. So there are discussions on that. So how to basically is a code of conduct for countries when introduce a CBDC. Think about the international implications. So there is a discussion on that. This was done when the UK was the chair of the G7, so the group of 7 nations. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can manage to open the other one, but it doesn't look like. I don't know why. Let me close this. Okay, there is something strange. I don't understand. Content administrator. It doesn't look the name of the. Let me rename it. I have no idea why this happens. Okay, never mind. It was just. We had 2 remaining slides. We can do it next time. So okay, so I would say we finished today, and so again, yeah.
Can you please a little bit elaborate about exam, because 15th July it's like a few days before exam.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe like structure weekly.
Yeah. So this is the first year I teach this particular course, so I don't have past exams that I can show you. But and they still to prepare the exam. So, but I'm expecting that there will be 3 or 4 questions. Then will allow you to basically link different concepts. For example, so I would things like would be something like the role. So what is the role of trust? And then you can discuss, the token versus account base and so on. No? It's a bit more open, but a bit more guided also. So, so the idea is that you must be able to connect, because the course is not very technical, so I cannot give you an exercise to do. It's more like that you understand the concepts and you can connect them also. Sorry?
It's 90 minutes.
The slide. So you don't have to write a lot, also because as everybody, I guess you always your handwriting difficult to read. Some of your handwriting will be difficult to read. I mean, I always have trouble with that. So don't write a very long thing, but it would be like at most 1 page for each question maximum, I would say. So try to be precise to the point. So don't write. Also, please don't. So if you don't know the answer, don't write on something else, because some students do that. So they don't know the answer, whether to show that they know something, they write 3 pages on something else, and it's a waste of my time, your time, and so on. So the exam is about answering that question. So I'm not interested if you know something about digital currencies. I'm sure you know, but it's about follow the topic. Really read the question carefully, and follow what I want in the in the question. Now, I'm just saying what I observe in other exams, So a lot of going off track, but in principle, this is what I'm thinking of doing. So like 3, 4 questions, which allow you to link different lectures. So I don't think it will not be by topics necessarily. So it's not that I will ask you, okay, tell me about something about stable coins. It will be more like, I don't know, this characteristic is important, and then you have to say, okay, we see it in stable coins, we see it in Bitcoin, and so on. So linking different concepts. So I have a bit of an overview of things. That's more or less what. Because again, this is not a very technical course. It's more like an overview. So I guess it's the right way to look at it. Any other question on the exam? I mean, I will say more when in the last lecture, but. Especially when I know what I've done, which I still have to. But of course, I will not tell you exactly what I've done. But yeah, maybe if you want, ask me also next week, in 2 weeks, on the 8th, because in the 8th I will already have done it, because I need to send it by the 4th, I think. So so on the 8th I will have done it, and I may know more about it. Yeah. I think if you follow the lecture actively, you understand the concepts and so on. I think the exam should be very doable. Yeah. Okay, so we see each other in 2 weeks from now then. Okay, thanks.